Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Vemkar and Zohrab Christ as Hope Classical Armenian series. This series is going to take place over a course of 8 sessions. It's going to be the Wednesday evenings, starting this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and will go once a week until September 1st. It's being offered in conjunction with the launch of this Vemkar module of Christ as Hope. And so let's just look for a minute at all that is available with this module in general. So as you can see, if you go to vemkar.us, you can see all the different sessions that are being offered from July to September. So if you click on any one of these to register, you can see a list of the different sessions and who's going to be speaking. So it started with Bishop Daniel's Christ as Hope talk to kind of orient us to the theme of the series. And the good thing is, if you missed it or if you miss any of these, as you can see on the right, if you click watch recording, it'll take you to, I believe, the Vemkar's YouTube channel, where all the talks and everything that's part of this series is being recorded. And that goes for our series as well. If you're not able to make all the sessions, you can watch any of them recorded later. The register link will take you to the Zoom where you can register for it. So these are kind of general talks on like messages, sermons, talks, presentations, or more personal approaches related to the theme. And you can see the next speaker in this series, August 17th, Dr. Roberta Irving from St. Nerses. Then there's 3 language series that are all revolving around the theme of Christ as Hope, but in some way incorporating Armenian language into it. So there's the modern Armenian ones, both Eastern and Western series. If you're interested, you can register here. These are mostly teachers from the Eastern Diocese Saturday Sunday School network, and also Deacon Yervant Kuchukyan, who I believe is present and is also going to be one of the presenters in our Classical Armenian series. The Classical Armenian series you can see here. So I'll be presenting our first kind of text and reflection, and then in the coming weeks, we'll have Father Ravon Tajamian from Armenian Church in Dallas, Texas. Former Deacon Timothy Aznavourian, recently ordained Father Nicholas, will be doing the 4th session. And then Julia Hintlian, who's a PhD student at Harvard, also studying at St. Nerses. Father Hovsep Garabedian, who's the priest in the church in Washington, D.C., and has studied at St. Nerses and is also getting his PhD at Catholic University of America. Ani Shahinyan, who's a PhD student at Oxford, and Deacon Yezras Talalian, who I'm sure most everyone here knows from being around the diocese, St. Nerses. He's also either finishing a PhD or has already finished a PhD in, I think, psychology. And then there's a couple presentations related to sacred music. So please do take a look at these. The idea for the Classical Armenian series grew out of what we've been doing at Zohrab for the last year or so, what we've been calling Karapar and Kini, so Classical Armenian and Wine, where we get together about once a month with a different guest speaker who's usually either a PhD student, a professor, a priest, a deacon, somehow involved in either the Armenian Church or Armenian scholarship, and listen to them about a text they're working on. And more than listen, we distribute the texts in advance so everyone has a chance to read them on their own. And then we come together to kind of read, translate, discuss together. And it's been a real enjoyable series, both for those who have come as presenters and also those who've been coming on a regular basis. If I didn't have you all muted, I'm sure there would be people who would attest to how much they've enjoyed the series, because I think a lot of the audience is those from the Karapar and Kini series. If you're interested in joining that series, you can send an email to the email address that I'm going to write in the chat. So zohrabcenter@armeniandiocese.org. Or you can, if you don't catch this email in the chat, if you just go to zohrabcenter.org, this page here, then you can either sign up to follow the Zohrab Center, or you can just send an email here and say you're interested in the Karapar and Kini series or classical Armenian study in general, and I'll add you to kind of our group list. Okay, I think that's all the notes that I had to start out. So let's look at the first. So the first thing we're going to be looking at today, I chose a short piece by Gregory of Narek, Gregory Nararekացոյն, his Ode for the Ascension. But first, we can talk a little bit about the author, the context, and just kind of orient ourselves before we dive in. So Gregory Nararekացոյն, of course, needs little introduction for most. If there's any author or writer or spiritual figure that someone knows from the Armenian past, it's Gregory Nararekացոյն, and in particular, his prayer book, the Madyan Vokhperkutyan, or Agotakirk, or as we usually just call it in Armenian, the Nareg. He's also gained wide fame in Catholic circles, you could say, because in 2015, as most of us know, Pope Francis declared him a doctor of the Universal Church. And now he has a feast day every, I think, February in the Roman Catholic calendar. And there's been a series of books that have come out in translations, kind of prompted by this, to sort of introduce Gregory of Narek, his texts, his writings, and his theology to a wider audience than just the Armenian Christian audience. You know, we know him, he's our saint, but now he's also a saint of all Christian churches. And so I'll reference a few of those books later. Gregory Nararekացոյն is sometimes, we don't know much, we don't hear much about where he came from, where he was educated, how he became the kind of person that could write the book and works in general that he did. He didn't fall out of the sky. He lived during the first florescence, you could say, of medieval Cenobitic monastic life. Most of the monasteries, if you go and visit Armenia today, such as Datev, Sanahin, Hakhpat, many of these were founded in the 10th century, which is when Gregory Nararekացոյն lived. His father, which you can see pictured on the left in a beautiful manuscript illumination, Khosrov Ansabadzi, was a renowned writer in his own right. He has beautiful commentaries on the Jamakirk, the liturgy of the hours, as well as the Badarak. And Khosrov had 3 sons. Gregory was the youngest. When Khosrov's wife, so Gregory's mother, died, he sent Gregory, who was then probably 5 or 6 years old, into the newly founded monastery of Narek. Why did he send him there? Because Gregory's mother's cousin was Anania Nararekացոյն, pictured in the middle, who was the first abbot of Narek Monastery and was renowned for the time as a theologian. He was renowned for his musical abilities, and he was renowned as a philosopher, he's called, but in the monastic sense, where just as much as kind of the intellectual approach to philosophy, it's also a reference to living like a philosopher. So the way Socrates was known not just for his knowledge, but for the way he lived the best human life. So Gregory lived there from a young age and was shaped in that world and surrounded by his father and relatives who taught him. This is a picture of Narek Monastery, which was still standing in the early 1900s. It was unfortunately destroyed either in the genocide or shortly after, and now there's a mosque that stands in its place, and it looks basically unrecognizable. Like, it's not like they do sometimes where you just put a minaret on top and it becomes a mosque. It was basically leveled and a new structure built in its place. But it was founded in the 930s and 940s, as I mentioned, a much simpler structure than what you see on the screen. This would have been built over time. And so Gregory was shaped in the monastic context from his early age. And as far as we know, he lived his whole life here. He must have made little trips around, especially the Lake Van region. But he was basically a product of the monastic world in its time of kind of most excitement in terms of they're kind of creating things for the first time. It's like the golden age of medieval monasticism. And yes, there were also these caves nearby Narek Monastery. These are pictures from just several years ago. And this is about a kilometer and a half or 2 kilometer walk from Narek Monastery. And we know that the monks would make solitary retreats here to practice their spiritual disciplines, vigil, fasting, prayer, and various other kind of austerities. And according to tradition, Gregory wrote the bulk of his book here, or at least some of it here, the book that we know best from him. And so you can actually still see these today. So the book we most know him for is the Narek, Madian Boch Perkutian Avotakirk. English readers would be familiar with the book on the right, Thomas Samuelian's translation, which I believe came out in 2001. And it's a very good translation, especially for a spiritual devotional approach to the book, guided by prayer. The one pictured on the left is in modern Armenian kind of rendition of the Narek. And you can find it in modern Armenian, the original Karapar, English, and at least a dozen other languages that it's been translated into, including Arabic, French, Italian, and many others. I mentioned earlier that there's been kind of a flurry of recent books that have come out since he was declared a doctor of the church by Pope Francis. And you can see 3 here. Obviously, they're part of the same series. It's Liturgical Press, academic in Minnesota. And so the book on the far right, The Doctor of Mercy, that is a book that is the best starting point in English for Gregory of Narek's lifetime's theology and works. It was written by Michael Papazian, and it was meant in particular to introduce Gregory of Narek to a kind of worldwide audience. And so it sets him in the context in general of Christian theology, comparing him as well to Latin theologians or writers. The book on the far left is the Festal Works of Gregory of Narek, a translation of his odes, litanies, and encomia, or in Armenian, the Tաղ, Kansk, and encomia, either the Nerpoch, Nerpoch. So this book came out in 2016, and it's a translation of some of the maybe less familiar works of Grigor Nárekatsy, but no less beautiful and no less powerful. And they're also shorter. And so for someone approaching, the text or looking for something to read, they can be great. And it was published by Abraham Terian, or translated by Abraham Terian, retired professor of St. Nerses. And the text that I chose today, actually 2 texts, but one that we'll focus on, are the Odes for the Ascension that Gregory of Narek wrote. And the translation can be found in this book on the left. It's full of a series of poetic type texts that were written to accompany various feast days of the Armenian Church. So the Feast of Nativity or Baptism, the Feast of the Ascension is the one we're going to be looking at, Transfiguration. There's basically most of the major dominical feast days are the ones pertaining to the life of Christ. These are absolutely beautiful and profound works that are reflections on the gospel passage in question or the feast in general. And even if you don't know all the references he's making well, that's one of the beautiful things about Abraham Terion's work is, for anyone that's looked at this book before, you'll notice it's full of footnotes. I know Matt Sarkisian, you've been reading it, for example. And so the explanations he gives to explain the meaning, the references, the connection that Gregory of Narek is making in these books, in these works, is like, it's a class in itself to just read the book and follow the notes and references. And it's very exciting also that the middle book is going to be Abraham Terion's new translation of the Narek, so the Madyan Perkutian. And this is due to come out in October, later this year. And I got to see a PDF of it, and it's incredible. It's going to be really, really good. So, as I mentioned, we're going to look today at the Gregory of Narek's Ode for the Ascension. The theme of this series is Christ as hope. Hope implies a crisis, right? You don't need hope unless something's gone terribly wrong or terribly unexpected. Hope only becomes relevant when, by appearance, something is terribly wrong. You don't need to hope for something to be better or for change to occur if everything is going great. So we all, of course, collectively, as human beings and also in our own individual personal lives, are going to encounter throughout the course of our lives times where crises happen and hope becomes most relevant. So where might we expect that the theme of hope would be reflected on in the liturgical year? So one area that would be most relevant to look for would be Good Friday. So the crucifixion. Everything looks like it's gone wrong. Christ is supposed to be the Messiah. He's supposed to be the King. He's supposed to redeem the people. And instead he's crucified, and it looks like all hope is lost. So we know the end of that story. It's that he was resurrected, and we have the testimonies of those who saw him afterwards in the Gospels. But there's another crisis that happened shortly after the resurrection. And it's that Christ goes away. And the Feast of the Ascension celebrates, of course, the ascension of Christ, because as we know from his own words, unless he went away, he couldn't prepare a place for us. He couldn't send the Holy Spirit. And the story would be incomplete. We wouldn't be able to truly follow Christ or live after him unless he went away. It's in his absence that he becomes most present and most understandable. It's only 30 years or so after the Ascension that the Gospels are even written, because it takes time to reflect and realize just what all did Jesus Christ's life and teachings mean, what all actually happened. So I turned to the Gregory of Narek's reflections on the Ascension, thinking maybe I'll find something related to hope there that we could look at, and it did not disappoint. And so we'll look together. So this is the very short little text that we're going to look at together. In the book, The Festal Works of Gregory of Narek, there's 3 different works he wrote related to the Ascension. This is the shortest little piece, and it's really just kind of, you could think of it as like an appendix to the 2 more lengthy odes on the Ascension. And so we're going to read together one of them in English, but we're going to hear the Armenian a bit, just to set the stage for the one that we're going to read. But before we even do that, we should look at the gospel passage of the Ascension that this is all going to be based on. And so let me just get oriented here. So this gospel passage, as you can see on the bottom, comes from the very end of the book of Matthew. These are the last 5 verses in the book of Matthew. And we can read it together. This is one of the gospel passages that is read on the Feast of the Ascension. So why is that relevant? Because it's this kind of thing that Gregory of Narek is reflecting on as he's composing his ode that is going to play with the themes and play with the gospel passage to provide us with greater insights and reflections on what's going on. So let's read this together and translate as we go. So first I'll just read it out and then we'll go back. Իսկ մեդասան աշակերտքն քնածին ի Գալիլեա ի Լիառնն ու ժամաթիր եղևնոցա Հիսուս իբրև դեսինս նա երգիր բաքին նմա եւ ոմանք հերկվածան եւ մադուցյալ Հիսուս խոսեցավ նոսա եւ ասե Տվավ ինձ ամենայն իշխանություն հերգինես եւ հերկրի որբես արաքյաց զիս հայր Եվ ես արաքեմս ցեզ, քնացեք այսուհետև, աշակերտեցեք զամենայն հեթանոսս, մկրտեցեք զնոսա հանուն հոր և որդվո և հոգվույն սրբո, ուսուցեք նոցա բահել զամենայն, որ ինչ պատվիրեցի ցեզ, և ահավասիկ ես ընցեզ եմ զամենայն ավուրս, մինչև ի կատարած աշխարհի. So it's a familiar gospel passage. So, isk medasan ashagertken, kanatzin. So ashagert, student, pupil, but the disciples. So medasan, we have me or meg and dasan. So dasna meg, 11. The 11 disciples. Why 11 disciples? Well, it's after the Ascension. So Judas the Iscariot has already betrayed Jesus and they haven't yet replaced him. And so there's only 11 of them. So that's a signal already of the disciples' state. Not only did things not go as they thought, but one of their number not only left them, but betrayed them. Isk medasan ashagertken kanatzin, went, past tense. I Galilee, this is Galilee. So they went to Galilee. I Liarnan, to the mountain. Ur, where? Jamatir Yerev Notza Hisus. So Jamatir, Jamatrutun, we use today, even in Armenian, as like, it's basically a rendezvous. So Jam, hour or time, and then tir from tanel, to place or make. So when you place a time, it's you making an appointment. So they went to the place where Jesus had made an appointment for them, or like had appointed them to go. So they go in expectation. Iprev desin is na. When iprev, desin from see, past tense though, when they saw him, is na. Yergir bakin nama. They worshipped him. So we know this from the liturgy, like Astudzo Yerger Bakastsuk, let us bow down before God. Literally, the Armenian is Yergir, earth, Bakin, or Bakel is to kiss. And so bow down. So they bowed down before Jesus. Yevomank hergvatsan. And vomank sam hergvatsan. You might see a root you recognize in here. So yergu is the number 2. So you have meg 1, yergu 2. Hergvatsan, to be of two minds, or to be of two opinions, to be stuck between two things, meaning doubted. So they fell down before him, but some of them doubted, meaning they don't know like what they're actually seeing. Is this Christ? Is it not? Yev madutial Jesus chosetzavat nosa yevase. So, and this is a past participle from the verb to approach. So madutial is and approaching or having approached. Jesus chosetzav spoke. Untnosa with them. Yevase and said. So these are Jesus's words to follow. Devav ins amenain ishchanutun hergines yev hergri. Devav is from the verb dal, which is to give. And this is passive, past tense. So it has been given. It's been given to me. So what's been given to me? Amenain ishchanutun. Ishchanutun, power, authority. Yeah, and amenain, all. So all authority or power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Hergines yevegri. Vorbes arakyats zis hair. As the Father sent me. Yev yes, Arakem says, I also send or am sending you. So just as the Father sent me, I also am sending you. So it's quite the greeting. No hello, no let your minds be at ease. It's he knows they're equipped and they can be equipped to fulfill the mission, and there's no time to lose. And so he goes on, Kanatsek, go forth, go, Aisu Hadev, like from here or hereafter. Ashagerdatsek, so remember Ashagerd, disciple or pupil, Ashagerdatsek, command as a verb, make pupils, make disciples, make students. Make who students? Zamenain hetanosas. All the hetanos you could recognize. There's an English cognate for it, or English borrows from the same Greek word, I believe, ethne. So hetanos, we have heathen, which has a very derogatory meaning in English, but it's basically just generic nations. It could be just what non-Jews, basically just other nations. So make disciples, make all the nations into disciples. Mugardatsek is nosa. Mugardil, baptize, to baptize. So mugardatsek is nosa, baptize them. And we all know this. Hanun hor yev vortvo yev hokvuin serpo. Baptize them. How? In the name, or really into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Usutsek notza, again command. So see all these command forms. Ashagerdatsek, mugardatsek, usutsek. Teach them, notza, bahel zamenain, to keep, zamenain, all, vor inch batvidatsit says. So to keep all of that which I have commanded you. So teach them to keep, as in to do or perform, everything that I commanded you to do. So also teach them to do. Yev ahava sig, and behold, or and look, or and trust me. Yes, ant sezem, I am with you. Zamenein avuris. Avur is a form of the word or, which is day. Za, with this form of a time word, means for that length of time. So zamenein avuris, for all days. So throughout all days, I am with you. Minchev igadaradz ashcharhi, until gadarads is like completion or fulfillment, and ashchar, the world. So until the completion of the world, usually in English translations, until the end of the world, until the end of time, or yeah, until the end of the world. So why is it so relevant that he says it? Because so this is where the Gospel of Matthew ends, which is pretty striking. He doesn't actually go away in the Gospel of Matthew. In some of the other Gospels, I think there is an ascension scene where he goes away. Certainly in the beginning of the book of Acts, which is the counterpart to Luke, it opens up with that. Why might there not be an actual depiction of Jesus leaving here, going up to heaven? Maybe the gospel writer is trying to underscore this final line. Despite the fact that he's gone away, or like we already know reading this, he's gone away. But what's important is not his absence, but his presence. I am with you unto the end of the age. Despite all appearances, despite the fact that he's not visible, he's here with us. It's by means of going away that he's present. So this is the gospel passage for the Ascension, one of them. So now let's take just a little look at, we could have gone straight into the little one that I chose. Another one of the reasons I chose that one, apart from the theme, was that it's probably the shortest text in the book and the simplest grammatically, the one we're going to look at. But I don't want you to come away from this with the impression that, you know, Gregory of Narek wrote this big prayer book of 95 intricate, beautiful prayers. And, you know, Jesse also mentioned that he wrote these other odes, but it sure seems kind of simple and basic, which is the one we're going to look at. Even though it's profound, it's rather simple. So I want to read the one that comes before it, which is the main ode for the Ascension. So you get a taste of just how theologically profound these texts are. And first, I'm not going to read the whole Armenian for this one, but I want to read the beginning because I want you to hear the sound. Listen to the alliteration of the beginning of this Tաղ Համբարձման, ode for the Ascension. En ein anein, yagani eyag yagali, aneritzen anerpitz. Havidianus anhas imani, anged aijmus hasu. Zotza zakeni zakumen zir, mushtad zaval anpoch. Minen heitz zarmitz heraz kaitz, hamako shavir voditz antats. And it goes on, but we'll just read the English here. The existent, himself of the existent, the uncreated, one of the eternal, became one of those who at one time did not exist. He who was eternally beyond reach, known to be unbounded, now became reachable, whose rising from the bosom of the Father is like the ever-expanding circuit of the sun, immutable. For he is one of the existent kind, of the related three, of the same essence, needing no path for his feet to tread. As for my being, I am like the existent, the unalike. My properties come from high above the ethereal heaven, pointing to the original image of God, after which the likeness was fashioned. He directed his swift ascent in that path, rising to be with him. Having tabernacled in the Virgin, fulfilling the will of the one who sent him, at the set time, he declared that that period was now over. When lifted upon the cross, he looked forward to his ascension to the Father, the upward flight to that wondrous height of the related three. With the flapping of their wings, those myriads of the finer ranks alerted one another. Quick, make yourselves ready. Who is this breathless one adorned with colors from Bozrah? He is the brave king returning valiantly from battle. Lift up the gates, O princes, bring tidings of good news to the Father. Behold, your heart's beloved of whom you testified, this is my beloved Son. With a kiss of holiness, I took my seat in the paternal bosom. The Holy Spirit honored me with those of my company. My gifts you shall surely receive, the commitment and promises that are true. I am with you always. And so you can see in this first piece, Gregory of Narek's focus is on Christ himself, where Christ, he takes the big picture approach, where Christ came from and where he's returning to. He came from out of time. He came from the beyond, and he came from the immaterial, and he entered into it, and now he's returning. And he reflects philosophically and theologically on just how profound and paradoxical that is, in order to inspire wonder and therefore awe and a desire to worship in us. And remember, these are written for feast days to help us understand and reflect on just what this feast and therefore what this event in the life of Christ is all about, what it means for us. And what it means, and so then you see how he gives speech to Christ here, describing himself, and then it goes back to Gregory reflecting on it. And then the angels speak as they're seeing Christ ascend, and they rush to the Father to tell him. It's obviously poetry, you know, no one's thinking that this is literally what happened, but it's to get us to just kind of wonder and in awe at the magnitude of what's really going on. And what's so significant about this for us comes in the lines at the very end. The Holy Spirit honored me with those of my company. My gifts, Christ speaking to his disciples, you shall surely receive. The commitment and promises that are true. I am with you always. That's the deepest commitment of all. That's the deepest gift of all, is the presence of Christ. with that, we can do all things, we can at least get by. Without it, it's questionable. So in the first one, this is actually the second one, but the first one is like this, where it's all reflecting mostly on Christ. And then at the very end, our focus goes to those left behind. As he says, I'm with you always. And so the last little appendix piece goes to them. What's their state? Where are they? And so it's this little piece here. And so I've broken the 3 stanzas into to make the text larger for us to see. So let's start with this one here. So, Ein pokrig hodin derdmial, Vedagas ardas vats pechial, Ein sagav kantin, Vororm avarig ared. So you might recognize some past participles, derdmial pechial, and hodin, hod, a flock of sheep, and so poker, pokrig, also a recognizable word, small. So hod is a flock. Hodin with the in at the end means to the flock. So it starts out, to that little flock that is so saddened, that has become so sad. Vedagas ardasvats pechial. Pechial is to like emanate from, or here with tears shed. So that has shed or sent out rivers of tears, streams of tears. Why? Because they've just seen Christ go away and they don't know what it means. This is Gregory imagining the scene. So Ein sagav kantin, to that little group. And it's even more little than 12. It's only 11. Vororm avarig ared. Avarig is like, if you read modern Armenian poetry, you might see avar as like alas. So avarig is like lamentable, something to be, to feel terrible about. And what do you feel terrible about? Ared, the calamity, the catastrophe, the misfortune, the crisis. And vororm. Vororm, we know, like der vorormia, mercy. So mercy in light of this lamentable catastrophe or crisis even. And so I just wanted to point out one little reference here. So the pokrik hodin, as Abraham Terion points out in his book. So one of the great things about that book is you can follow all the biblical references he gives and look up the original scripture. And so here's an example of how you might do that. So, mi erganchir hod pokrig, zi hajatzav hartzer, dal tze zarkayutun. Mi erganchir, do not be afraid, hod pokrig. So you see pokrig hod pokrig, little flock, because your father, it's your father's pleasure, you could say, to give to you the kingdom. It has pleased your father to give you the kingdom. Your father desires to give you the kingdom. So don't be afraid. Okay. So the scene has been set. They're sitting there saddened, crying, shedding lots of tears. And there's some kind of request from a voice we don't even know from where, kind of requesting or desiring mercy for them. Second stanza. Zaches iver hampartial hergines. So it's one more line to set the scene. And you know that because this is the past participle matching the derdmial and pechial from before. So it's also referring to the flock. So what else do you see? Hampartsum. What is hampartsum? Hampartsman, hampartsum, the Ascension. So, but it's about their eyes. So their eyes lifted Hampartial, their eyes ascended or lifted above, Iver. They're looking up. Hergines, to heavens, to the heavens. So they're sad, they're crying, they're looking up to the heavens. And they say, Vor yes, hair, vor pots husov. You who are the father of orphans with hope. So it's something to the effect of they're looking up with hope to the one who is the father of orphans, because they're orphans now. They're a flock without a shepherd. Hansen arareres mez, daraguis pagine mer. Who or whom, it even sounds like whom in English. Whom did you, Hansen ararer, Hansen arnal is to appoint or commission. Who did you appoint for us? Who have you decided to set over us? Because we're a flock without a leader. Daraguis pagine mer. Our lot, our portion is daraguis, uncertain. Guis is the side, like the side of something, and dar means to go back and forth. So daraguis is like we're uncertain, we're waffling, we're wavering. Last stanza. Hishya mi moranar, ser chostatzar ansud paniv, ant mezlinel zavures genats, minch ikadarads yergri. Remember, this is them speaking, looking up to heaven, but it's us speaking. In the reading of it now. And that's how he meant it to be understood. So Hishya, remember, mi moranar, don't forget. Ser chostatzar ansud paniv, you promise love with speech that does not lie, with true speech, with speech that is not false, that cannot be false because it came from the divine. What did you promise? Unt mez linel. We've seen several times unt with pronoun meaning with us. So to be with us. Zavures genats. Remember in the gospel passage at the end, zamenain avures, for all days. So zavures genats, for the days of life. You promise to be with us for all the days, kind of understood, of life. Minch ikadaradz yerkri, unto the end of the world, unto the completion of the earth. And that's a direct reference to the Ascension gospel passage that we looked at. Avasi gesentezem zamenain avures, minche vikadaradz ashkarhi. So what's interesting about this is that who is the speaker here at the end in this last stanza? It's not Christ right now, right? Gregory's shifting the time and playing with it on us. So what's relevant in the celebration of the feast day, yes, we're remembering and commemorating what happened, but it's about us, it's about our lives. And we're speaking and reminding God of what he promised, because we're in crisis and we're lost and we feel forsaken and abandoned. And we're saying, don't forget, you promised, and your promise can't fail, to be with us until the end of time. And so we can reflect together on this. And throughout this time when we're focusing on hope, this is one of the texts that not only can help us reflect on this approach, but can teach us what hope is. As Bishop Daniel said in his first lecture to open the series that was so inspiring, was hope is not an emotion, hope is not a feeling. That's how hope is kind of thrown around when you hear it talked about, as like you feel hopeful, or it's kind of like this almost abstract or airy sort of thing. But it's not, it's a certainty. It's a certainty that's based on something sure and known, but it just appears as if it can't possibly be true right now by appearances. But your frame is sure, and despite the appearance of it not of it being a catastrophe, there's something deeper that always supports you. And all of that is encapsulated in Christ being with you no matter what. And that's the basis of hope. So we should all memorize this. I am with you for all days unto the end of the world. Thank you.